Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy ? With my friend Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy ? With my friend as well, Dylan, and we're putting a question mark in front of there because we're continuing our extracurricular reading series. I think it's coming to an end now with this discussion of Poor Things by, I hope I get his first name right, Alasdair Gray. And also the movie as well, which just came out this year starring Emma Stone. So a lot of exciting discussion to be had around this. Again, this was one that I had read and I'm bringing forth to discuss on the show. And it's a work of fiction, and then we can get into its fantasy ties in a little bit. But before I do that, Dylan, have you seen the movie at all? I'm assuming no, right? We haven't talked about it.
No. I did see Emma Stone's acceptance speech for whatever she won. From
you mean the Oscar for Best Actress? Yeah, she won that award for this movie.
Haven't heard of these Oscars you're always going on about, but some small, like, she was nominated for some small award. And
some award. I can't remember which. Maybe it was the award that you could win for an actor. But
that's up to interpretation, I would say.
Up to interpretation. And we're not going to get into that today.
We're going to get into it because...
What was she like?
Her dress had broken in some way, and she was like... I don't know. She looked kind of upset by that. I don't think there was a wardrobe malfunction, like of anything that would be not allowed on TV or anything like
scandalous,
that. But she was very focused on the wardrobe. Yeah, so that's what I remember.
I did not see the Oscars. I just know that she won, and I know that Mark Ruffalo was nominated, and I want to get into that. In my opinion, he was snubbed. I knew he was not going to win. Obviously not, but he should have. Robert Downey Jr.
my opinions on Ruffalo, right?
I know, and this is what I'm excited to bring to the episode today, and I'm going to get into that. But before I do, I need to just Poor Things, guys. It's a movie based on a book from 1992, and I watched the movie, was so impressed by it that I then read the book in some of the downtime that we had when we took a mini break, and I was like, I could crank this book out. It's relatively short. And then when we were coming back to record episodes, I was like, well, I read this book. I read Poor Things. It's kind of fantasy. Why don't we just record a discussion and see how it goes? And that's what we're here to do today. I'm going to keep the description pretty high level, just based off the IMDb. It's literally only 2 sentences. And I'll explain why in a second. But Poor Things, an account of the fantastical, evolution of Bella Baxter, a young woman brought back to life by the brilliant and unorthodox scientist Dr. Godwin Baxter. So my history with this movie is kind of interesting. I knew nothing about it. My fiance at the time, now wife, was like, hey, I really want to see this. Thank you. I was like, I really want to see this movie. It's called Poor Things. Do you want to go? And I love the movie, so I never say no for the chance to go to the theater. But I made the conscious decision, because to not look it up, to not read about it. I literally had no idea what it was about, who was in it, anything. And it's a really bizarre movie to go into not knowing anything about, because this movie is off the walls, bizarre and insane and weird. But it was fantastic. I mean, if not for Dune 2, it would be my favorite movie of the year so far. Wow. So it's number 2 for sure. And there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, I was pulled into it right away because the premise is just so bizarre. So the movie was fantastic, and then I picked up the book. it's going to be tricky to talk about them because what's a spoiler in one is not a spoiler in the other, and vice versa. So I don't necessarily want to go into too much detail about what happens in the book because it may conflict with what happens in the movie. I mean, there's not like too many twists and spoilers that would ruin the movie experience for somebody, but I still don't want to give anything away that's meant to be withheld for the sake of the experience of watching the movie or reading the book. So I'm going to dance around a couple plot points in that way. But here's what kind of interested me about the movie. Like, my takeaway from the movie was, here's a movie that's super like surreal. It's set in late 1800s Victorian era Glasgow in Scotland, and that's kind of where this story starts. And then it goes on, you know, Bella Baxter, the main character, goes on this grand adventure. The movie's kind of controversial. One of the main reasons it's super, like, I'll guess sexualized. Like, there's a lot of full frontal gratuitous nudity, and sex is a huge part of the story, and the movie's kind of absurdist, so it will just show a lot of really weird like sexual stuff. So it's kind of odd and disarming to see some of that stuff, but you know, I'm always a huge, like, when it's done well and it's creative and funny and thematic, like, I enjoy it a lot. But it kind of reminds me of something like, it's not like The Boys, but The Boys the show on Amazon uses like explicit gore for like comedic effect. And this will use explicit sexual content for similar purposes. So it can be a turnoff for a lot of people. So you do need to have a pretty broad appreciation for media literacy to be able to fully take in what the movie's doing. But at least it balances it with just super, super well thought out thematic development, I'll say. So it kind of starts with, you have this character, Godwin Baxter, played by William Dafoe, who's excellent, by the way. And this book gets compared to Frankenstein a lot, and he's kind of like a Frankenstein creature himself. He's like a famous surgeon, and his dad actually performed all these bizarre experiments on him when he was a kid. So he looks like a Frankenstein monster, kind of, where he's got all the deformities and the scars, and like, he has to, like, when his dinners, he has like stuff like tubes hooked up to him, and they're running chemicals through him all the time to keep him alive. So he's kind of like Frankenstein's monster and Frankenstein the scientist combined in a lot of ways. He wasn't like dead and brought back to life, but he was so heavily experimented on, and he's such this surgical genius that he kind of plays both roles. So it's a really interesting character, and what he does is he brings this woman, played by Emma Stone, back to life. He's like, oh, I found this woman had committed suicide, threw herself off a bridge, and I like dragged the corpse in, and I performed this amazing feat. I brought her back to life, and she looks totally normal. You know, Emma Stone's beautiful, right? So she looks like a beautiful supermodel Victorian era woman, right? Like, but what happens is, when he brings her back to life, she's infantile. She has the mind of a newborn. So she's like kind of crawling around the floor and like looking at things for the first time, very infantile. And then what happens is all these other characters come in, and it's hilarious to see, like, because she grows up pretty rapidly, but she's basically got the mind of a child in the body of a woman. And then she encounters all these people as she goes out into the world, and just the way that she's treated and the way that she experiences things puts this really interesting lens on just like feminism and sexuality and like masculinity. It's this really interesting premise. Like, it's funny because there's another doctor who comes in and falls in love with her like immediately. It's kind of funny to see, like, why would you, be attracted to somebody who is basically a child, but when you don't know and you see this person, you're kind of drawn to them, and they're so whimsical because they're so like, their perspectives are crazy and they're doing crazy things, and she's attractive to look at, and so you're just enamored by her, right? And then you have the character of Mark Ruffalo. And Dylan, I know you're a big Mark Ruffalo fan, right?
No, I hate Mark Ruffalo.
What? You hate Mark Ruffalo? I thought there was
Mark Ruffalo.
I thought you were a Mark Ruffalo. I thought there were, in the early days, you were like before Marvel. You were a Mark Ruffalo guy.
No, you're mistaking my strong distaste for Mark Ruffalo.
Oh.
Like, you probably associate me with Mark Ruffalo because I had strong feelings, but you have mixed up the direction of those feelings.
I just remember, like, when we were in New Zealand and that movie came on with Mark Ruffalo, and you guys were like all about it, and I was like, well, we're in another country.
Oh no, we were making a joke of it.
I see.
You thought so? You thought that? So this is now devolved already into like inside joke territory. But when we were in New Zealand, me, Charles, and Derek, our other lifelong friend, who's Charles's co-host on the currently on hiatus, Roger, a Star Wars podcast. We at some point we're in the hotel room and some movie came on with Mark Ruffalo that was not very good. I can't even remember what it was, but it was like,
it's like he's a ghost, or his
like
love interest is the ghost. One of them's a ghost.
Yeah, I think Ruffalo is a ghost.
It's a rom-com.
I think Derek and I started acting like it was like the greatest movie we've ever seen. And we just gaslight Charles into
Pretty much.
But Charles was not having it because Charles was seeing that this movie was actually bad. And Derek and I just kept insisting. So I thought you knew that joke was happening, but now I'm starting to doubt that you knew
here's
that.
my take. I never liked Mark Ruffalo either. I was
Okay.
like, how is this guy just always in stuff? What does he bring to the table? Was always my thought. He just seemed like a random guy on set, like, to me, always. But in this movie, he's amazing. Like, he's really good. And he plays a very, like, physical role. Like, he's super, super funny in it. But anyway, it's interesting to compare it to Frankenstein, right? Because almost like in reverse, where the ugliness is on like it's just like this outward physical threat of a monster running around terrorizing people, when really it's this innocent creature. And now you have the reverse. It's like the creature, the monster, is actually like this beautiful woman. And then now she's the one who, like, the world is trying to control her in all these different ways. And so as she's growing up, like, almost immediately there's a character that, like, wants to marry her and proposes to her. And she accepts, but she's got the mind of like a 4-year-old, And then as she gets a little older, she realizes, hey, you know what? Before I get married, I want to go on an adventure. And that's when Mark Ruffalo swoops in, who's like this, kind of greasy lawyer, like one of those like amoral lawyer type characters. Yeah. And he's like, oh, like, if you run away with me, we can have all the fun you want, and I'll take you on all these adventures. And she's like, ooh, that sounds like fun. And it just gets whisked off with Mark Ruffalo, and they go on all these crazy adventures. But what happens is, like, she gets older and older and older, and then she starts to, learn all of these new things and this and that. And you start to realize, like, all these people in her life have tried to control her in different ways. You have the Bella Baxter character played by William Dafoe, who created her, who's this like protective father type. And then you have like the guy who wants to marry her, who's really just like trying to control her through like the love of being the fiance. But as she develops more of a, she's like, well, sex feels good. So why wouldn't I have sex with more people? Because that's her impulsive child mind, like starting to be like, ooh, I could like do this more often with all different kinds of people, and then obviously her fiance is not having it and is trying to be like, hey, like, that's not what proper people do. This is Victorian society. And then she's like, well, I'm going to leave. because it's all about all these people trying to control her at different stages of her life. And then you obviously have the Mark Ruffalo character who's claims to only care about her freedom, and it's like, hey, you can have all the freedom and sex you want with me. I'll show you the whole world, tempting her in that way. And so you're reading the story, and it's so bizarre and so odd. And the movie is super surrealist in its design. Like, it's got these weird painted sets, and it's got these super odd costumes with like poofy shoulders, and like with the Willem Dafoe character, like, is got all these weird tubes in him and is all disfigured in like weird hyper stylized ways. And what's really happening is in the book is where it's the biggest departure, because the book is very serious. Like, this takes place in Glasgow, is very literally Glasgow. There's nothing surreal about it, but all the same crazy story like components are happening, like beat for beat. It's very similar. So it's kind of interesting to see the interpretation of like, hey, the wild stuff that this guy's writing would make for a really great like hyper stylized movie, and it just really works. In both cases. I will say that my thing about the book, which the book is not as good as the movie. I'll say it straight up, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's like it was written in 1992 about Glasgow. It was like a political commentary, critical of the politics at the time story, not in the target demo. Whereas in the movie, I am kind of in the target demo of like a modern American audience, right? So big difference there. But the other one, Dylan, is like it's a book that's written through like letters. It's like, those Victorian style novels. Called? What?
Epistolary.
Kind of. It's kind of, but not really, because it's like, okay, so one of the characters
this from me, Charles.
He wrote the book, and then it's like you read the book, and the book is like the letters of them writing back and forth to each other. So it's kind of like I don't know if it's straight up the traditional sense. It's a weird, complicated book in this way, where it starts with like, oh, I'm a journalist, and I found this book. And like, it's the only one of its kind, and it's such a weird story. And then it's like, okay, now it's the book, and the book is a guy like keeping a diary and writing letters. And then it shifts to the Bella Baxter character writing letters back when she goes on her adventure. She's writing the letters back, and then like the Mark Ruffalo character also writes letters. So you get like conflicting reports of the same account, but it's all told through letters, which to me is like it's just getting too complicated for me. Like, we're getting her side of the story through a letter written after the Mark Ruffalo character sent his letters in. It's all this kind of back and forth. And I will also say this, like, the book's ending is very, very different from the movie ending. Like, the movie stops about halfway through where the book goes. The book goes like
really
more deeper in, and there's because you're getting letters from everyone's perspective, you're getting conflicting reports on what really happened, and you're never quite sure what the truth is, where in the movie it's like, this is literally what's happening, and this is the story, and it's kind of told through Bella Baxter, following her the whole time. Whereas you've got characters like wondering where she is and missing her and worried that she's having sex with other people and that makes me insecure, and like all this other stuff is happening in the books. So it's kind of interesting to see the creative choices made of like, yeah, I get he was trying to like make, like, he takes this whole second half of the book to stomp on politics and this and that and be critical of society and this and that. But this is the interesting part to me, the fact that here's a woman with the mind of a child getting like, with all these men falling in love with her. It's like, why is that happening? And kind of exploring that is really kind of the interesting part of the movie. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the difference between the two and see the modern interpretation of a story that's like over 30 years old. And yeah, I don't know, it's just like so creative and bizarre of a story that I just had to read the book,
It does sound absolutely bizarre, Charles. And as someone, I wish I'd seen the movie at least.
It's
if I were to
streaming
do it
on
all
Hulu
over
at the time
again-
of this recording,
Okay.
so you can go watch it.
Yeah, I'm going to. I definitely want to at least watch the movie. And Charles, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the movie, and probably a smaller percentage of people have read the book. So let's say, Charles, I was someone who liked the movie, but wasn't sure whether or not to read the book. What would you tell me?
You don't have to, unless, for me, I read the book because I really liked the movie, and even then I was like, this book isn't great. So unless you really want more, then I don't know if I would necessarily give it a shot. But that being said, it is a great book, and it's so how did you even think up this so insane? The story is absolutely insane. It's this weird combination of all these different Victoria era stories, like Frankenstein and all these other weird stories kind of morphed and twisted into this very unique story. I don't know what more to say about it. It's the whole time I was watching it, I had no idea what I was walking into, and I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It's so bizarre. But no, I would, unless you truly loved the movie and wanted more. It's not a must read, I would say.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, you have me thinking I'll probably watch a movie and probably won't read the book. Yes. And that's all right, Charles. It's all right for FTF to come on and say, this book was kind of weird and not as good as the movie. I would say there's we're experiencing a little bit of a trend here, Charles. I mean, we did really enjoy Dune the book, but I think we would both agree, and pretty much both already said, that we enjoyed the movies more, especially the Dune Part 2 was just phenomenal. And there seems to be something that these folks are doing right when they're making these movie adaptations, because it seems like the trope has always been the book was better than the movie, and they left this out, or they missed the point with this, and blah blah blah. But it seems like things have been shifting a little in the other direction lately.
Yeah, and I think that's what's the case with Dune and with Poor Things. These stories are old. I mean, Dune is from the 50s, and Poor Things is from the early 90s. So
Poor Things is as old as me and almost as old as you.
Yes, months we're talking about. And so I think when you're doing an adaptation, it's important to consider okay, there's going to be you have to adapt it to a modern audience. And I think a smart director knows what makes it interesting for a modern audience, and then how to make it relatable to a modern audience by tweaking the themes a little bit, tweaking the narrative a little bit. Because okay, I can't have an ending where it's super masculine white savior kind of stuff. I can't, I would get crucified. No audience wants to see that in 2024. So it's okay.
I love your perspective of the film creator being still completely morally bankrupt and not considering anything about the actual message itself so much as the own perception of them. Probably more accurate, Charles, than if you presented them as morally concerned with the message. But go on.
For sure. And so obviously Dune and Poor Things, they were more sensitive. They just created a really good story. But I think there's a part of that, right? Your Hollywood producer brain is you just can't. It's not gonna fly. But that presents an opportunity to do something different and interesting. And you can listen to our Dune episode where we talk about why that was so significant. And then I think the choice to stick with Emma Stone's character, the Bella Baxter character, and watch her and follow her, and almost this she she goes on like this Wizard of Oz kind of adventure where she just goes from city to city and she's on cruise ships and she meets people and they're all trying to control her in different ways, and her naivety and like, and how that informs some of the, and her impulsiveness. And then she gets more and more mature and she like discovers philosophy at a certain point, you know, and she discovers that there's poor people and that makes her feel bad, and you know, like all this other stuff. And so I just think that there was something smart about focusing on that instead of then trying to expand it and enter like the political stage and all of this. It was smart. And then making it surreal, making it kind of bizarro in terms of its look and its vibe, kind of added to just how ridiculous some of the like sexual stuff is. I mean, it is bizarre. It gets super weird, and it's content. It's like explicit, but also like it's from the perspective of a child. So there's something like not sexual about it most of the movie, but there's still like full frontal nudity of all body types, and there's just all kinds of encounters that are super bizarre that you couldn't think of until you were in the movie. Like there's a scene where in the very beginning she's like got the mind of an infant, and the guy is, you know, William Dafoe's experiment, like doing surgery on a cadaver, doing experiments, whatever, and she's just like messing around with the body like a kid would. She takes a knife and just like starts stabbing parts of the body, just like impulsive, weird stuff, and it's so bizarre. And I think couching it in some of that surrealist vibe instead of being very literal Glasgow Victorian era like helps kind of move that along, because there's a huge portion of reviews that are like 1 star, this movie's vulgar and it's like gross and weird, and that's a fair reaction to have. It shows you stuff that most audiences may not be comfortable seeing, but it does at least challenge it enough. And it's thought-provoking enough where, to me, it was... I always appreciate when I've seen or read something I've never seen or read before, and that was the case with this movie. And when it's done in a way that's thought-provoking, then it adds. And when you have this theme, which is really kind of like... and I was reading a Goodreads bio that said it really well, where it's the duel between the desires of men and the independence of women, which is kind of what this is about. And that's the super fascinating part of the story for me, is just like, here's a woman trying to live an independent life, and here's at every stage a different kind of masculine impulse that conflicts with that directly. It's like, you can't have sex with other women, I'm your fiance. But she doesn't know what a fiance is. She just knows that sex is good, and she's like still figuring it out because she's got the mind of like a teenager at this point. So I don't know, it was super interesting, and I walked away from that movie being like, ooh, like there was a lot of subtext in there, and you can be distracted by like the super bizarre full frontal nudity in a weird way, or you could be like, the point of that was to show like exactly how weird society and human nature and human impulses can be. And when you create this perfect like idealized being of a adult woman with no like with the mind of a child who doesn't have all the complex thought of realizing that someone is manipulating her, taking advantage of her, right? Like, because she doesn't know, trusts people implicitly. It creates this really interesting vibe. And it's like, why do all these guys just fall in love with her immediately? Like, there's something funny about that too, where it's just like, why is this like the perfect wife material for certain men, you know? It's just kind of, I walked away from it like intrigued enough that I wanted to read it more. And that's the best I could say about it. Like, really interesting. But if people are going to watch this based on my recommendation, they're going to be like, that Charles guy's a weirdo. But I'm sorry. I thought it was good. And I'm not the only one, because Emma Stone won the Oscar. Okay. So it's like, I can't be that weird.
You heard it here first. Charles can't be that weird. And you know what's really weird is that Mark Ruffalo mustache in this. There's something just off-putting about I don't know.
Dude,
The shape or
the Ruffalo
form
performance
of it.
is amazing. I was so shocked. I was like, this guy can act. Where's this guy been all my life? You know?
I mean, I came on strong with I hate Mark Ruffalo. That's probably the strongest I've come down on anything in our show's history. Is just, oh no, I hate Mark Ruffalo. I hate is probably too strong, so I apologize to Mark Ruffalo, who I know is listening, and I'll say that though he's usually not very good. Although I think that it's like the stuff he's always receiving accolades for happens to be the stuff that for some reason I'm not watching, possibly because I'm like, oh, this big movie has Mark Ruffalo in it. So it might not be such a coincidence, but it's like he really is so bad in certain movies that I think I end up not watching his movies he's supposed to be good at. And that's like, dude, Now You See Me or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that movie? Did you watch that movie?
No. I mean, I barely remember it. Maybe I did when it came out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I totally did. The Magician one. He's in that?
Dude, he's like the main...
Oh, yeah, there he is.
Like, I mean, he's arguably the main character. Maybe he's not, but he's
Jesse Eisenberg was the main character. But yeah,
sure. He's like...
They made a second one of those.
No, they really shouldn't have. But... he's so bad in it, dude. It's like one of the worst acting performances.
Well, that movie is
I've
just kind of... It's just a silly premise to begin with.
Yeah.
He's great in this because he plays like it's an absurdist character. He plays it very straight, and his comedy is very physical. And so there's scenes where they're dancing, or there's a romance scene, or they're fighting. And it is just, he's like a kind of a villainous character, but he gets his comeuppance because Bella Baxter, even though she's got the mind of a child, is just making him crazy because he doesn't know. He thinks she's just an eccentric woman. Like, he doesn't know she's got the mind of a child. He just thinks here's this beautiful woman who thinks and acts in bizarre ways, and I'm in love with her. But now she's like saying and doing weird things that I don't understand, and it's making me crazy. It's so funny.
Sounds like a little bit satirizing the Manic Pixie Dream Girl
100%.
idea as well. It's like a lot of those characters. There's that classic, you think of Garden State is one of the go-to movies, and you think of this.
Oh, she puts up with me being a slob, and she loves my interests, and she likes to smoke weed and play video games, and she's quirky, and I love her, and she loves me. You know, it's like exactly that. It's like, you realize you would have to give a lobotomy to somebody to make them like that. Basically, like, you would
Natalie
have to remove
Portman's
all
character,
identity and agency.
Natalie Portman's character in Garden State probably acts exactly like Emma Stone's character in Poor Things. Like, she straight up acts like a child, but
I mean, it's like
Natalie
it's
Portman.
like let's just jump in the ball pit.
Exactly.
It's like, what are you talking about? Jump in the ball pit? It's like, wouldn't it be crazy if we did that? And then we made out in the ball pit. It's like, that's exactly then the dude's like, this is so hot. It's just like, that's exactly what it's kind of lampooning, and
that's good.
But it kind of throws you off when it's like, you can't get over the fact that she is super infant, like literally, and so you're kind of turned off. Like, is this like a weird pedophilia thing? But it's not, because the guy doesn't know, and it's his objectification of her, and his like, what makes him attracted to her is that's the whole statement. That's the theme. So it's like, you got to kind of like navigate those tricky waters to get to what is the whole purpose of making you uncomfortable in that way. It's just like, hey, isn't it weird that men are attracted to women like this? Like, isn't that kind of odd? But it's like, the fact that she's a child, this movie's perverted. It's like, that's kind of the point.
So is Garden State. Although great soundtrack. But I will say, it does make you think, oh, what if, let's say, Garden State, and I apologize to Zach Braff, who I know is listening, but it's
him and Mark Ruffalo.
Like, if that movie just had like a a scene right before the movie started. Everything else is identical, but a scene that indicates just like Emma Stone's Poor Things character, like Natalie Portman had been revived from the dead and had the mind of a child, and everything else about the movie is the same, it would probably come off like sick and perverted and weird and pedophilic, like the Poor Things can come off. It honestly probably would come off the same way.
And keep in mind that it was a suicide victim too. So there's all that. There's that aspect of it too. I mean, it's just it's an interesting exploration for sure. And that to me, it's like some people can't look past the gratuitous nature of like the sex and stuff. And I totally get that. Like if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, like you won't be able to look past it. It is so explicit. But to me, it was something unique and original and thought-provoking enough. Like sometimes you have to hit those extremes to like incite something in your brain, like that's like kind of trigger something where you're like, this is super odd. But at the same time, it's like I could see why Mark Ruffalo would be obsessed with this Emma Stone character and want to whisk her away and show her the world, you know? And it's like to be like, oh, I'm showing her the world for the first time, and that's attractive to me that I'm able to do that for her, you know? It's just like, it's so interesting. So interesting. And it's also a form of control because she can't just walk away. She doesn't know what a train is or a boat or a hotel. Yeah. So it's just like, you have to stick with me. And then when she does something he doesn't like she starts getting interested in other people or gets interested in like helping out people that are poor or sick by giving them his money, you know, like there's a scene where she just like gives away his money that he won gambling, and he finds out and he just goes insane. He's like pulling his hair out, and it's like, we're ruined, we can't afford our hotel, you know. It's like stuff like that is happening. It's funny how he just gets totally unraveled. But highly recommend the movie, and then if you're obsessed with it as I am, check out the book as well. That's my take.
Yeah, and check out Emma Stone's acceptance speech.
I'll have to check that out. That'll be next.
It's not necessarily worth watching. It sticks out because she was freaking out the whole time.
And I think, I kind of remember, because in the show, which I think also won an Oscar for the costumes, or at least it was nominated, because the outfits are ridiculous. If you see the trailer and stuff, you can see it's just like over-exaggerated Victorian era stuff, at least for Emma Stone's character. And so I think she wore a dress that was kind of invoking some of that weird design choices, which would explain why it maybe malfunctioned in some way, because it had these goofy things going on with it. I kind of remember her red carpet attire being similar to what she wore in the movie, which was always insane looking. It was weird.
It does. The pictures that I've seen do kind of bring to mind Hunger Games Capital, a little bit toned down version of that.
It is very Hunger Games Capital, absolutely. District 1 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're not quite in all the face paint. It's not quite the level of like frills or whatever, but it's kind of in between actual Victorian era stuff and Hunger Games Capital, and perhaps leaning toward Hunger Games Capital.
It's got the flamboyance and the surrealist and the absurd about it that kind of permeates a lot of the movie. Like, the movie has weird painted sets that just like kind of Tim Burton-esque slanted buildings and stuff. Like, they're obviously on a set with a painted backdrop, but it kind of feeds the vibe of the movie. And I don't know, it was really interesting. Really, really interesting. So
you've got me intrigued, Charles.
You should definitely watch the movie.
Watch it soon. Yeah.
You should. I feel comfortable recommending it to you. I wouldn't go out there and tell everybody to watch this movie, because like I wouldn't tell every coworker of mine to watch this movie, because then they'd watch it and be like, "What is this freaky stuff that he just made me watch?" Like, you have to be
you know
like,
how many more people you're telling to watch this movie?
Yeah, but we've kind of curated an audience here where I feel comfortable telling our audience to watch it. Wow. But I wouldn't just tell like a coworker with different tastes and who wouldn't normally watch this show to go watch the movie. Like, if they've never seen movies or read stories like this before and then just jump into this, they're going to be like, what kind of freaky stuff is this guy into? You know, this is like, I'm used to watching like Young Sheldon. This is shocking. You know, like, if you go from Young Sheldon to this, it would be a lot. So you need something in between. Yeah.
Although Sheldon is in a
not too
young
much
body
in between,
with
surprisingly.
Sheldon's a young body, but has the mind of a much more I don't know, maybe not mature because he's probably socially. I don't watch the show, but he at least has a much more like intelligent, advanced mind.
For sure, like he can't
Emma
connect
Stone,
with younger people. Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. So Emma Stone's kind of the opposite. So maybe Young Sheldon's deeper than you're giving it credit for.
Yeah, maybe there's only really like 1 degree of separation. There is a transition there that you could do that it wouldn't be so
And you know what? The guy who plays regular Sheldon, old Sheldon, he was in Garden State.
No kidding. Wow. I did. That was way before like Big Bang Theory and all that.
No, he was just Jim Parsons back then. Before he was
Sheldon. Your lore of the Young Sheldon universe is pretty good.
As someone who's
the meta
never
of
watched
Big
an
Bang
episode,
Theory.
I do pretty good.
Specifically Sheldon lore, not like the show or any other characters.
No, I have something of a fascination with the idea of like Sheldon and Big Bang Theory being as popular as it is. Mm-hmm. But we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, let's do a Big Bang Theory show discussion for an episode. That would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And then they reference the Hulk, which Mark Ruffalo plays the Hulk. I just assume they reference the Hulk because they reference all that Marvel nerd culture stuff.
Oh, I'm sure.
This was peak Avengers and all that.
It was like... Yeah, what I've seen of the original Big Bang Theory, it was like what someone who doesn't know any nerds thinks nerds are like a caricature of nerds, but also like the things they were obsessed with actually like aren't as deep cut nerdy as what actual nerds are into. You know what I'm saying?
Idealized, desired version of a nerd. At the peak of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all that. So
well, we'll get back to Big Bang surely.
We'll have a whole treatise on it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But for now, that's a wrap on Poor Things. Check out the movie. Let us know what you think. It's kind of
maybe read the book.
You know, a movie's spicy when it's got like a lot of 1-star reviews and a lot of 5-star reviews. You're like, oh, something happened. Something happened here. And interesting to see. Whichever side of the camp you're on is totally fine. I'm on the 5-star side, but I understand the 1-star side people. So, like, hey, go form your own opinion. And I think until next time, we wrap it up?
Yeah. If you come away with a few quibbles or gribbles about the...
Yes. If the idea of Emma Stone being hypersexual just starts to gribble in your mind, then that's okay.
Much like the isopod for which that word was named.
It's absolutely. We're bringing that word into the modern lexicon, and we're giving it new meaning. Language evolves over time. This is a big one. We're watching
the Google like search whatever it's called
trends,
Google search trends to see if we can actually bump the word dribble.
All we have to do is get like 10 people to search for it to bump it.
Like in the entirety of Google, like 10 people search it a day. So you can be one of the elites who we're
gonna bump it up. We'll make it happen.
So search Gribble. Learn about the small white crustacean that can grow up to 10 millimeters and, can cause damage to peers.
Yep, exactly. Google it. All right, let's get the outro music going.
both episodes today that we just recorded end with Gribble talking.
Yes, we did record the last 2 episodes back to back, and so Gribble is the word of the day, and I guess the next 2 weeks of the show. So That'll be a good experience for some people, especially those that listen all the way to the end. Thank you for doing that. And if you want to support the show even more, one of the ways that would help us out is to follow us and engage with us over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and then at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end over on Twitter. Now, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than following and engaging with us over on the socials, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify. Just gotta get to that Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed. Click about, give us 5 stars. You know what to do. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can write nice things about us. You can tell Charles all the things that you think might be wrong with him for enjoying.
Why did you recommend this to me? What is wrong with your sick brain?
Yeah, 5 stars though.
5 stars.
You can call Charles
absolutely.
as sick as you want, but
exactly.
you gotta throw us 5.
Hit us with the 5. I mean, I did warn you, so that warrants the 5.
Yeah, you can give 1 star to Poor Things if you didn't like it, but still give 5 stars.
Yeah, you're welcome to do that.
Podcast.
Like, it's a big Hollywood movie, won Oscars. Who cares if you give it 1 star? We do this for the love of the game. We need those 5 stars.
Yeah, but just listening is more than
yes.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, as Dylan said, just listening all the way to the end about Poor Things. Like, you guys are the real fans. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.